Hi, welcome to Funding for International Students in the U.S. Thanks for joining us. This is presented by the Graduate College Office of Fellowships and Community Engagement. For now, if you have questions along the way, if you could use the chat function, and then when we get to the end, we'll have time to actually talk if you'd like to discuss questions verbally. I'm Shelley Hawthorne Smith, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Office of Fellowships and Community Engagement.
I'm Georgia Ellers, the Director of the Office of Fellowships and Community Engagement.
Hi, I'm Tolga Türker from the UA Global Program Director for Eurasia Programs, and I'm also an instructor at the International Security Studies Program at SGPP.
We're going to start with an overview of how international students pay for graduate school. Most students use a combination of these avenues to get through graduate school. And the first one that's probably the most common and possibly the most preferable are teaching and research assistantships. Usually these are within the department, and we'll talk more about them in just a minute. There's also fellowships from inside the university. So this is what we refer to as internal funding. And then fellowships from outside the university, external funding, and we'll expand on all of these. There's also work, which is sometimes challenging for international students to get the right visas for, but often international students can work on campus, but be sure to check into that, of course. There's some tuition waivers. Often people get about to the dissertation stage, or sometimes these are given when students are coming in. Students can use savings or loans, which are the least preferable option, but are an option for some students. So we're going to start with the second bullet, internal funding, and then we're going to talk about external funding. So internal university funding.
Well, as Shelley said, with the graduate and teaching assistantships, those can be within your department, or they can be in another department where you might be qualified to teach, for example, teaching a foreign language, or at a research center on campus. It can also include student-centered centers such as the think tank or other kinds of, dean of students, other kinds of programs that support students on campus but aren't affiliated with an academic unit. The level of responsibility and pay varies. Generally on an assistantship, there's a progression after more or less based on your year of academic standing. And with any assistantship, you're charged as an in-state student, and then part of that in-state tuition is waived. It does not cover mandatory fees or any program tuition that a particular department might charge over and above the base tuition. Student health insurance is also covered for only the student, and you must sign up for it, but that provides really nice value. There's a small discount at the U of A bookstore. On an assistantship, you're entitled to the university holidays. You aren't required to report for work. There are also some parental leave options for grad students who are parents, and you're paid with what is called a stipend rather than a wage. But it is taxed, and it does come through human resources in our payroll office. So with the teaching assistant, it really varies a bit depending on the department. Typically in most departments, you're involved in grading or perhaps facilitating a lab or holding office hours. In some departments, you're actually teaching the classes. That's usually the English department, chemistry, I think, or foreign language. And then with a research assistantship, that's really a common offer for many students coming in, where you might be in a particular lab and supported by the professor who manages the lab. You might be have access to work on a particular grant, although there are some limitations that we'll talk about later, or in a research center. And the nice thing, in some departments, you're just given a research assistantship to really work on your research topic, a thesis, or a dissertation. So it is the most common way grad students are supported, including US citizens as well as international.
We talked about internal fellowships as well as research and teaching opportunities. So there are opportunities, for example, when you get to the dissertation stage, there's some writing awards that I believe international students are eligible for. So you want to talk with your current department and use the departmental website. Be sure to talk with faculty and other students. If you don't use Scholarship Universe, I would recommend that you do use it. It was built for undergraduate students, so you'll probably get a lot of things that don't pertain to you, but there's enough on there that is relevant to graduate students that I think it's worth spending a little time to set up an account and do some searching on it. You want to look into other university funding as well. We put a link to the graduate college funding opportunities. This is a list of opportunities that are for all colleges, or most of them are for all people in all different departments and colleges. And some of them do have citizenship restrictions, but it's worth having a look through those. Also, I'd encourage you to apply for the GPSC Travel and Research Grants. These are less competitive than some other grants. That doesn't mean that you'll get it on your first try, but it is really helpful to apply for these to sort of get some practice with grant writing. And if you apply a few times and pay attention to the comments and to the review criteria, you will most likely eventually get these. Also, your college or department probably has a website that has lists of funding opportunities for graduate students, including ones that are for international students. And I put some examples here. This is not comprehensive, but it's just some examples of what colleges provide. So that was our summary of internal funding. Now we'll talk about external funding.
You'll find a lot of directories or things on different websites that say there's so many millions of opportunities and they go unfilled because they're too specific. Well, don't believe everything you've read, but do look broadly. And I encourage people to start looking before you even come to this country, really, because a lot of the most important external fellowships might be based in your home country, but you have to apply for them before you can actually, if you've already arrived in this country and already enrolled, you might not be eligible. So when we look at the world of external or extramural funding, some of those will be based on your financial need, which in the US you fill out the FAFSA form, which sort of is a standard that's used in all universities and colleges. And I think that international students can fill out this form here at the U of A because it's relevant to some of the funding that international students receive. There are different categories of fellowships. Some are specific to certain groups possibly underrepresented categories, or it could be gender or ethnicity based. It can even be based on international funding. For example, the Rockefeller and the AAUW have things, I think, specific to certain countries and citizenship. There are travel awards, which often are, I think, some of the I won't say easy, but fairly a good place to start in looking for funding. And Shelley's already mentioned the Graduate and Professional Student Council funding, but there are often travel awards through your professional association to attend a conference or give a talk. And as long as you're a member of the professional association, there usually is no citizenship requirement. There's some to visit different archives if you're working in history or political science or something like that, where there's material that you need to look at and it's only available in a certain archive. There is a lot of funding available for going to learn a different language. And Shelley and I have been working with a student who is from China, but did her master's research in Japan and is here in the US doing her dissertation. So she's, I don't know, fluent in 5 or 6 kinds of languages. She's really extraordinary. So it doesn't matter if you're international, there's still often reasons to be learning a different dialect or a different language there. And then again, presenting either at a conference or going to do research abroad. So all of those have different kinds of funding. At the dissertation or the thesis stage, there is often funding to go abroad. And this is where I think it gets a little bit easier for international students because a lot of the dissertation research, if it's on a grant application that is submitted through the university, your academic advisor tends to be the principal investigator or PI. And that person's citizenship or affiliation can make you eligible for the funding. And the fellowship application is essentially funding for the research for a specific student, but in the name of the investigator. So that's where citizenship often becomes less of an issue. And after you've done your research, there are not a huge number, but there are some fellowships out there, usually for writing the dissertation. And that's really handy because if you're having to work full time while writing the thing, it's pretty challenging. Then, of course, if you are in a doctoral program looking beyond the doctorate itself, there are a number of postdoctoral fellowships, which I think rarely have a citizenship requirement. They're often offered through a particular institution or research entity. And then in some disciplines, such as particularly in the arts, I would say, there are different honors and prizes and awards, usually for the dissertation. I think it's the Council of Grad Schools kind of rotates the best dissertation in the last 5 years in a certain area of study. And we're always looking for qualified students to submit to those sorts of things. Do you want to add to that?
Sure. First of all, I think both Georgie and Shelley, they gave a pretty comprehensive picture, and I don't know what I can add to all that. And but I can say I understand. I know your pain. I spent quite a bit of time in the United States as a graduate student, and I had to look for multiple sources of funding to complete my degree, and I had to work extra time and all kinds of things to be able to finish the degree. And I'm also a bit of a limited use in this case because you guys are already in United States, and some of the things that I suggest actually requires a little bit ahead thinking that like things that you could have used before coming to United States. But I think some of the things may be relevant to you. First of all, I think one of the major sources of income, in addition to family and relatives, for our international graduate students are their own home country. That the governments in parts of the world have a tendency to provide scholarships to their students, to their citizens to go and study abroad. This may not be just the government itself, but there might be organizations in your country or companies in your on your home country that could be used as a source of funding. Some of the examples that I have in mind, and we have students on campus using these scholarships, such as from Saudi Arabia. They send over 10,000 Saudi students studying in the United States. Turkey sends thousands students a year. Kazakhstan, they have the well-known Bolshak relationship. Latvia has come up with a recent scholarship. Azerbaijan's, for instance, Azerbaijan's state company of oil and gas provides scholarships to their interested and qualified students. In addition to that, there are several international organizations, such as the Fulbright Commission, who can aid students all over the world in their aspirations to become a student in the United States. But again, this might be not so relevant in your case, because this requires a bit of head thinking, and you have better chances of getting a Fulbright scholarship when you are studying in your own country. But there's also United Nations, Soros Foundation, World Health Organization. So all these international organizations can be used as a support. International students are not eligible for U.S. federal aid, such as Stafford loans and PLUS loans, but there might be some other sources of funding if you are an international student coming into the U.S. to study. It might be wise to check with the local U.S. Embassy. U.S. Embassy in your country, and especially since it's my region of interest in Central Asia, the American embassies in Tashkent, in Nur Sultan, or in Ashgabat. In the last 2 years, I've seen more and more RFPs coming out from the U.S. embassies located in these parts of the world. They can be thought of as some sort of supplement. International student loans is possible, not ideal, but you can find some options that can give you, that can loan you some money. But again, this is a very fragile topic that it's very important that you do not take on too much debt. Employment while you're in the United States as an F1 or J1 student is possible. However, the immigration regulations are very strict with respect to working while carrying a student visa, which is the most common status for the full-time international students, and this allows for part-time on-campus employment, fewer than 20 hours per week. J1 students also are allowed to work for similar employment with similar restrictions, as long as the permission is given by the exchange visitor program sponsor. Jobs on campus usually do not pay much, and certainly they are not enough to finance a university education. So do not count on this kind of job for anything more than just a supplement to your already to your funds. One last thing I can suggest is the OPT, optical practical optional practical training. International students in the US with valid F1 immigration status are permitted to work off campus in optical practical training studies, both during and after their completion of their degree. The rules for this is established by the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, and they govern the implementation of the OPT, and all OPT requirements, authorizations requires prior authorization from the USCIS. You can apply for OPT after being enrolled in a program for at least 9 months, but you cannot begin employment until you receive your employment authorization document from the USCIS. You do not need to have a job offer in hand to apply for the OPT. It gives you that could use that, option. You do not need the work. But most of the cases, OPT, you need to be employed in an area that is directly related to your major. You must maintain a F1 status. You should apply for OPT before the completion of your program. Um, and OPT is only for 12 months. So that's all I can say, I think. There are more questions.
Yeah. So Tolga covered most of these here. There's these sources of external fellowships. So I won't go over them again, but this is just a list to keep in mind. The big question is how to find this funding. There's some really comprehensive databases which are available to you if you're a U of A student. One of them is Pivot, and this is a huge database. It is not just for graduate students. It has funding, big research grants and funding for people in multiple different countries, multiple different types. So it takes a little while to learn to navigate Pivot and come up with the best results. But there's a lot of help online, and I have a lot of information on my website, which is linked here. The great thing about both Pivot and Grant Forward, which are really similar databases, is that you can save your search and then they will send updates to your email. So once you get a good search, then you can have automatic updates to them. There's also some university databases, UCLA and Cornell. You can find those on my website that I have linked here. Those are both small databases that are just for graduate students, but you can do a search for your discipline and specifying your citizenship. We'd encourage you to also try searching with and without the international student screen. Sometimes you need to kind of drill down into the specific eligibility in order to know what will work for you. So it is worth your time to have a look at what's available without that.
This is Georgia. I also wanted to say that Pivot and Grant Forward are subscriptions with the U of A library. So when you use them, they are free to you. Do not purchase a subscription on your own, please. But you need to go in and register as a University of Arizona researcher using your U of A email, and that will give you access. You can also fill out your own an academic profile, which can help you connect with other researchers in your discipline. And you can also play with screening the funding. A lot of the funding will show what's offered in other countries, could be your own home country. So it's a nice way to sort of see if I am back in my country, where can I get some funding? So it's a nice thing to look at and sort of see what you might be able to use depending on your stage of study.
I think it's also worth having a look at these funding lists for international graduate students. Again, these are pretty general. I put 2 in here that I like, but it's actually, I think, as Tolga was saying, it can be really difficult when you're thinking about funding as an international student, and it's easy to feel discouraged. So when you look at these lists and look at the range of things that they have, it can be encouraging. And also, it might give you things that don't come up in your Pivot and Grant Forward searches, only because you might have not thought to think of yourself in a certain way. So seeing these lists, I think, can be kind of encouraging and helpful.
One other thing is that sometimes I've seen sort of fellowships or opportunities at other institutions that our students qualify for. And that's kind of a nice thing. If you might not be able to go to a federal lab, but you might be able to go to a lab at Harvard or someplace and work there for a summer or a semester. So keep that in mind also. And the University of Arizona has gotten much more involved in posting our internal opportunities on Pivot and Grant Forward also. So that's another reason to go in and save a search and get that information coming to you regularly.
I wanted to put a list of some examples of fellowships that are available to international students. All of these are fairly large awards and are pretty broad in terms of disciplines that they will sponsor. So the American Heart Association Predoctoral Fellowship is open to international students, and that's for people from a wide range of disciplines. The Mellon ACLS Dissertation Completion Fellowship is for people in arts and humanities, but I think they have 60 a year, which is pretty good. Society of Women Engineers has a huge variety of opportunities, and you kind of have to go in and look at what might pertain to you. There's a couple, I put a couple possibilities here for women, especially when you're working on finishing up your dissertation. There seems to be some good opportunities. If you're a woman and international student, there are opportunities for you that you should apply for. And then I put a couple travel opportunities here. So the International Dissertation Research Fellowship is a fairly large one and will give you funding to go abroad to do research. And the DAAD is for study or research in Germany. They have a really nice flexibility in how long and what you can do in Germany. So that's a great one to look into if you have any interest in doing study or research in Germany. How do I become competitive?
It's a process. And we've got a few suggestions here on the slide, just really thinking about what you want to do. I think with any kind of fellowship or grant, there's always a slight temptation to go with whatever the funding is looking for and to not be true to yourself. But I think you really need to think about what your interests are, but also how those interests intersect with other things that are relevant in the world. I don't know if it's a sad fact, but it's just a fact that a lot of funders think of themselves as change agents. So they're funding what they feel are the important issues in the discipline. For example, in astronomy, there's a decadal study that really determines where funding for the whole next 10 years is going to be going. So be up on what the issues are in your discipline. And since we're such an interdisciplinary school, also how that relates to other disciplines. So it's a little more challenging, I think, when you're interdisciplinary, but you have a lot more opportunities. So think about where you're going and pursue what interests you, but also I think, this is Mother Georgia speaking, you also want to be pragmatic about it as well. And you decide what you're going to do. And if you pick something that nobody's ever going to fund, well, there you are. Don't come crying to me. But do take advantage of the opportunities on campus. There are many different areas like social and behavioral sciences. Our office here that can help with helping you with writing, helping you with planning and preparing fellowship applications. I think word of mouth is as good a place as any to find things sometimes. I do definitely recommend the search sites, but getting to know your professors and your fellow students and where they've gotten funding is often where you really think, oh, that person got that. I'm like that person. I can get that. So it can be really inspiring. And if you have funding, we encourage you to share your success and how you navigated it with other of your students. A lot of companies will fund. We didn't actually have that on our list, did we? But there are a lot of organizations that have great discounts for study, and the University of Arizona is one of them that gives a tuition discount. You'll want to maintain a strong academic profile, of course, and I think it's also helpful to take either different kinds of leadership or service roles in your department or on campus or even in the community, where you might be able to just demonstrate your interests and your abilities. Part of being a professor in the United States is that you are expected to spend at least a small portion of your time on service, and also think long term in terms of preparing for management down the road. So you're spending an awful lot of time going into a discipline in depth, but also think about where you want your career to go. And then I think reading broadly and discussing, arguing, conversing, all of that is a great way to build your artillery for this.
The other thing that I would say is that as international students, not only are you adjusting to the culture of the United States and Arizona, but also you're adjusting to the academic culture. And even for domestic students, that's a big adjustment. So different people respond to these adjustments in different ways. And for some people, it's easy to talk to a lot of people and get to know people, but other people find all of this intimidating. But regardless, do make time to get to know your professors and your other students who are in your cohort. Especially for funding, these letters of recommendation are hugely important. And professors don't know unless you talk to them what you're like. And so it can be challenging, I think, to make time for those relationships. And for some people, it can be really intimidating. But it is really important to maintain those relationships.
I like to, basically repeat what my co-presenters have just mentioned, but in a different way. Stop worrying, start partying. Okay, that's the whole thing. And I know that graduate studies and graduate students are the most isolated people on earth. You're working on something basically nobody else cares about. And if you manage to publish something in a peer-reviewed journal, you will probably have, I don't know, like about 5 people read that document. So it doesn't have to be that way. Okay, so you have to engage with whoever you can find, whatever you can find, not just within your own discipline. Also, of course, it's a great idea to engage with people in your own discipline, but you should also make concerted efforts towards reaching out to people in different disciplines. Engage with the social clubs available on campus, engage with the young professional events in Tucson, and whatever you can find. Just be hungry and be greedy and just engage, and don't feel depressed. There's always a way to find money and be competitive.
I was talking to one international student, and he was telling me how challenging it was because everyone else in his cohort talked about these TV shows and he didn't know anything about them. So he decided to make it a research project, and he did not spend all his time watching the whole show, but he would watch a couple episodes of a few shows so that when these conversations came up, at least he would have something to say. And I thought that was really smart, because doing well in graduate school means doing great academic work, but it also means having relationships. And so it does take a little more work as an international student because you don't have those cultural touchstones that other people have. But you're a researcher and you can figure it out. So take a little time for that part too. Oh, we just talked about this. So letters of recommendation, I just jumped ahead. So plan ahead, get to know professors. Know that writing these letters of recommendation are a lot of work. So you want to be really organized when you ask for them, and you need to acknowledge that this will take a lot of this person's time. So you want to ask, what can I do to make this easier for you? Be sure to give them plenty of time before the deadline, and just be gracious in asking how you can help. They will probably want to see some of your some of your essays that are required ahead of time. So that will mean that you have to be working on those far before the deadlines. I wanted to give you just a note on timing too. So a typical timeline for fellowships, and this is not true of every single fellowship, but in general, the summer is the best time to start working on applications. Not all competitions are announced at this point, but almost always you can use the previous year's announcement to get started, and almost always the year's announcement will be the same as the previous years. If it's different, it probably will not be significant. In the fall or winter, most of the deadlines happen. So that's when you'll probably submit the applications. The spring is when results are typically announced, and then the funding begins the following summer or fall. There's exceptions to this timeline, but this is kind of the most typical one. And the most important point here is to keep track of the fellowship. So have a spreadsheet and begin working on them as soon as you can, as early as possible. We've kind of alluded to this, but you do want to be really careful about debt. So there are times when it is a good idea to take out a loan, but be sure to get plenty of advice and to figure out how to do it responsibly. One of the tricky things about graduate school is that there's this balance that you need to maintain. So you are in graduate school because you need certain sets of knowledge and certain skills, and it's really important that you take enough time to obtain those. But on the other hand, the longer graduate school takes, the more it costs. So you just need to keep this balance in mind as you're moving through graduate school, and try to keep working on timelines. They'll probably have to be adjusted, but the best thing you can do in terms of funding is get through graduate school in as little time as possible. I did want to mention our summer application development program. So I did say that the summer is the best time to work on fellowship applications, and we know it's not easy to stay on track throughout the summer. So we've created a program, and you do have to apply to the program. However, everyone gets in. I just want to make sure before summer starts that you're applying to something that's appropriate to you and that you're not missing anything. So when you submit an application to our program, we look at it and we kind of think about if there's other things you should be applying to. So we will announce this soon, probably the beginning of March, and our first deadline to apply is on April 22nd, and then we'll have another one in May. But if you are thinking of working on application over the summer, I would encourage you to participate in this program. All right, good luck. We have one question here, and feel free to, at this point, just either text us or do questions through the chat or even ask. Do you have any last words?
I'm trying to read the question here.
Oh, sorry, that didn't help.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
This is a question. I'm interested in learning a language during the summer. It's a critical language, Indonesian. I saw there's a course at the University of Wisconsin, but the scholarships are only addressed to U.S. citizens. Do you know any other scholarships for studying abroad? Thank you. And I was thinking about the FLAS. We have two of those here at the U of A, one in Latin American Studies and one in the MANUS program. And University of Wisconsin has been a nice program because it does allow students from other universities to apply to it, but it is funded by the U.S. Department of Education, and it's not available to international students. You can, at this school, go to the critical languages program and request. I think you have to have 5 or 6 people to actually get a class, but they will pull together less commonly taught languages. And I think that I would probably look at, I don't know, maybe even something from Indonesia. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. It's usually the FLAS or that critical languages program. What is that called? I think it's a
Yes.
critical languages fellowship.
But I think that's for
Is that for U.S.
I'm pretty
citizens
sure.
too? Yeah. So you're basically looking for maybe something like I know there's like a Mongolian Studies International Organization in the United States. So I think you might look for a professional organization that promotes Indonesian culture and studies and see if they might have something that would be a little broader. I'll take a look, and I guess we have access to your information here.
You can also reach out to study abroad unit within UA Global. They might direct you towards a relevant place, or they may have some money to give away. Who knows?
So are international students here eligible to use the
Yeah.
national exchange program that we participate in?
Of course, we have to, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They can.
So
They
that-
can come up with other things. They're special.
Yeah.
So
I've
it
known
would be
of,
a good idea to reach out, see what's available.
yeah, do check out Study Abroad and the national exchange programs. I've known students that have innovatively used both of those. Even though we tend to think of study abroad as mostly undergrad, but there are some graduate programs in there. What else do we have?
I will send the recording of this after we're done here. I had somebody asked if people graduating in spring can be a part of the summer application development program. Just send me an email and we'll discuss that. I try to make it work for people.
Shelley, did you tell people about your newsletter?
I also have a grad funding newsletter, and that goes out once a month. It's a list of current funding opportunities and some advice about applying for funding. And that information is on my website, how to sign up, or you can send me an email and I'll add you to the list.
And I just want to say I've written grants for many, many years, and it can be fun. They can be challenging. They can be irritating, and you don't always win. But I think it's important to understand that there are things you can control when you're writing for fellowships, and there are things that you can't control, like the citizenship eligibility or how many other people are applying. But it can still be a very useful process, regardless of the outcome may not be as apparent as you hope for, but it can pay off in the long run. Writing for fellowships can help you with your own dissertation research, figuring out what you're going to actually do and how you're going to do it. It gets you really conversing with your advisors and your committee, because they'll inevitably have to write those letters for you and will want to be engaged with your ideas. So beyond the mere worrying about your next meal and your rent and your internet bill, it has a lot of benefits aside from the actual award. So good luck to all of you. We really appreciate that you're here, and we think that you all add a lot to the university.
I'll second that. Feel free to send me an email privately if you have additional questions. But again, thanks for coming.
Thank you all. Good luck with everything. You can reach out to me at atturker@arizona.edu.
Maybe we can add that to the chat box.
It's on the
something or
it's on
other.
the
Yeah,
slides.
it's on the
too.
slide.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
great.
on the slides too. Okay. All right. Goodbye.